With his dyed hair and his fake mustache, Richard Meissner was feeling a rush of adrenaline as he was ready to walk into a bank to stick up the teller just a few miles from his parents' house. An aspiring PGA Tour golfer trying to fund his time on tour. This is the story of a man and a string of bank robberies that turned into a life of crime.
This is Distant Replay.
Welcome into Distant Replay. Glad to have you back with us. We got another interesting story to tell you about with true crime in the world of sports. Probably one you might not be too familiar with, but this is the story of Richard Meissner. We're going to take you back to the 70s, a string of 19 bank robberies from Meissner, but also it didn't end there. But let's begin by telling this story. You have to go back to Richard Meissner's youth. He grew up in a middle-class family in Silver Spring, Maryland. His father was actually a police detective. His mother didn't have a great relationship with him. They felt a little distant. And, for Meissner, a lot of it was trying to earn his father's approval. They're very opposite, judging by some accounts from friends, him and his father. As you could probably tell, his father being a detective, what Meissner's life went on to be. Well, you could tell that they were not that similar. But he tried hard to work to get his dad's approval, and oftentimes he turned to negative actions in order to get the attention that he craved. There were stories of petty vandalism at the club. He was taking golf carts out, tearing up the club, things like that. But you could kind of see that his behavior was a little off track early on in his life, and to no surprise with his upbringing. But he discovered golf at the age of 11. He was hired at a local range to pick up golf balls, and he had actually had a natural swing. The pro there at the club recognized it and pointed out that, hey, this guy has some talent, some potential, and he actually began playing competitively, winning some junior events. Back in 1962, he won the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Junior Championship and actually earned a sponsor at a few tournaments through there. And we're talking about a kid that had a lot of potential. He actually, in 1962, won a second-round match of the U.S. Junior Am, beating his opponent 9-8, which is still tied for the largest margin of victory in the junior amateur still today, nearly 65 years later. But as he grew up, he eventually got sent off to Vietnam. Like many people in that era, he had to go serve his country and did so in Vietnam right after marrying his high school sweetheart, Claire, in 1965. His job as a Marine was a baker for the Marines in Da Nang. And, his time was not a lot of action on the front lines, didn't see a lot of violence, but he did have one story that he did tell. And many of these accounts come from a great story that was in Esquire magazine back in 1980, many, many years ago. But while he was driving one of his deliveries, a car drove around him, pulled in front of him, and blew up, exploded. And he said he described the moment as blood and body parts kind of flung everywhere, and kind of opened his eyes because the bomb was set, as he described it, on the roadside, on the bridge, and had that car not driven around him and sped around him, that could have been his fate there in Vietnam. But it wasn't. And shortly after, he was honorably discharged in December of 1967. He went back home to Silver Spring, Maryland. He and his wife got a small apartment. They furnished that with some of the paychecks he had been sending her. And I think at this point, he was a little disillusioned because I think he came back expecting a bit of a hero's welcome, right? You went overseas, you served your country, you fought in this war. And when he got back, he said that he realized everybody's protesting the war and, people are actually upset with you for going over there and fighting for your country. They look at you as a jerk. So, he had this a little bit of an upset feeling over the way he was treated. And this would actually play into some of the decisions he would make down the road. But at this point now, it had been 2 years. He had not grabbed a club. He had not been playing at all. And, he still wanted to try to get into golf and try to play professionally. He still thought this was his path. This was his future. This is what he was meant to do. But he came back. His game was not very good. He was not hitting it well. He was not putting it at all, and just could not qualify for any tournaments. And he decided to go the way of the rabbit. Now, if you think back to the 70s, around this time, the rabbit was described as someone that would kind of bounce around from Monday qualifier to Monday qualifier with the hopes of eventually qualifying, maybe earning a paycheck at an event and trying to parlay that into a future on tour. These are people that would just stay at, really rundown hotels. They'd eat the cheapest meals possible, do what they could. And you're talking about hundreds of dollars tops it would cost to fuel and fund this lifestyle. And this is not even second class, right? You're talking this is probably a third class lifestyle on tour to try to fund this. And you're staying in your car, you're staying in your van, whatever you're driving, and you're just trying to get by from week to week. And this is the future for Meissner. He went this path and thought, okay, maybe I can get my game back. Maybe I can start playing better. Maybe I can actually earn a spot on tour. Now, Meissner finally got an opportunity through the PGA Apprentice program. Now, if you don't know what this is, it was kind of put in place to help train young professionals in the business of managing a golf course as a pro, and also certified graduates of the 40-month training program to be eligible to play qualifying rounds, and hopefully eventually that would lead to a spot on tour, right? And this was a way for Meissner to circumvent those qualifying schools and try to get onto the tour this way. Now, for money during this time, he actually just kind of worked some odd jobs. He worked the counter at a 7-Eleven. He sold men's clothing at a department store. And he was actually a night manager of a gas station in a bad part of town in Washington's inner city. And actually in this job, he actually had a man walk in, point a gun at Meissner, and asked him to turn over the cash box. So think about how this kind of foreshadowed the time to come for Meissner on the other side of that interaction. All the hard work actually paid off eventually in the summer of 1970. He qualified for the U.S. Open at Hazeltine. He didn't make the cut. He did look back on the opportunity and the experience fondly, felt pretty good about what he would, and gave him some confidence. Hey, I can actually compete. I know I have it in me to play with some of the top players on tour. Meissner would eventually get a job at another country club selling golf balls, working many, many hours a week, 7 days a week, earning just $100 a weekly salary. So nothing special. But then a better job opened up on Long Island's Gold Coast called Woodcrest Club, and he jumped at it, and he started getting a little bit more opportunity there. And the head pro there told him, hey, you're not going to pick up golf balls. I need you out there giving lessons. I need you to be providing playing lessons, and it's going to be an opportunity to not only earn more as your salary, but also pick up a little extra money in these lessons for every half hour that you work and you provide for these people. So he was working pretty hard and actually able to play a little bit more, kind of polish his game up with some local tournaments, and actually went on to qualify for his second U.S. Open 4 years later in 1974. That one was played at Wingfoot. Now, at this point, there's a little bit of promise in his game, and some people started to take notice, one of them being a Woodcrest member named Jack Stevelman. And this guy had millions, like many people at this club, and offered to bankroll Meissner on tour at $400 a week in exchange for a percentage of his winnings. Great opportunity, right? Well, Meissner, he could not really seem to get things going. And as kind of his golf was maybe starting to take off a little bit, his marriage started to break down. Now, his wife, Claire, had a couple of kids, and as she did, right, as she was raising her family, she didn't look the same as she did before. And Meissner, who always looked at her and always liked having her on her side as a beautiful trophy wife, something he could get attention for and could really look the part, right? As you can kind of see and you'll hear as we move forward, for him, a lot of this was appearances, right? What other people thought about him. And now he started to feel embarrassed by having her around at the club. This was all because she had a couple of children with him, and she's in recovery from that and working back from that. And you can tell he doesn't seem to care. Now, it kind of speaks to his character, right? But he would spend more time away from her, spend more time at the golf course, and he just didn't really care and put much effort into that relationship. Now, at the end of 1974, he ended up quitting that job at Woodcrest. He had this backer, this millionaire backer, and he had a few months, 6 months exactly, remaining on his PGA apprenticeship. So this is an opportunity right now to maybe become that member. But it's interesting. There was this kind of a last little hurdle to become a PGA member. It's an oral interview, right? So you sit down, you talk with some you talk with some of the PGA members, and they get a chance to kind of meet prospective members, get to learn more about them, who they are, and get a last kind of feel for them before they get in. Now, this is kind of where the character really kind of gets called into question even more for Meissner. At this point, he gets turned down because his reputation as a cheater. If you talk to a lot of the people around him, some of their accounts was, yeah, this guy, it was well known that he bent the rules on the course. Didn't matter. He would kind of do what he needed to do because he thought the rules somehow didn't apply to him. And he thought, okay, as long as I didn't get caught, everything's fine. And Meissner always staunchly denied that. Even when he admitted to the bank robberies we'll talk about in a minute, he still denied that he never cheated and said, hey, if anybody ever saw anything, why didn't they come over and say anything to me? But as you kind of hear the stories and hear more about his personality and how his life progresses, it's hard not to believe that he didn't bend the rules or outright break the rules while he was playing golf. The PGA actually never formally charged him with cheating, but they just kind of drug the process along for a few years and until he missed his opportunity to become a full member of the PGA, and then at that point lost his sponsor as well. And he was obviously very angry with the PGA board at that point. So this brings us to 1977, and he decided again to kind of pursue those dreams of making it on tour. And he had at this point been divorced by his wife, Claire, and he decided to, or at least convinced her to trade her Corvette, which is a $9,000 car, for a $6,000 van and give him that difference, lend him that difference. And you'll see he looked at a lot of the money through the years as loans, thinking he could pay them back eventually. So he used this money to kind of fund his first few weeks on tour, which he failed to qualify at a few, and actually led a tournament in Tallahassee at one point after the first round, but followed that up with a 77 and an 81 and did not make any money at that event. The next week was New Orleans. He strained a muscle in his back, dropped out. And at that point, he was so broke he couldn't afford anything. Couldn't even afford a stop and a night in a hotel. And it wasn't really, when you look back at his game, wasn't because he didn't have the game. He had the natural swing, as we talked about, and pros saw in him at a young age and could hit the shots. But he was awful at course management. Always try to take on the toughest shots, try the long drives, try to cut the corners, try to take the riskiest approach to golf rather than taking the more conservative course management play. He would always go for the home run, and this would end up costing him time and time again. Then there was one last attempt to garner some money before the crime really began, and this is when he went to the VA, the Veterans Administration, asking for a $15,000 loan. And for Meissner, he thought, look, people take out loans all the time to begin businesses, and that's all I'm doing. I'm going to start my business on the PGA Tour, and I just need some money to help launch that. But the VA pretty much just laughed in his face. No, we don't know. We're not giving you that money. No, that's not happening. And he thought about, look, I spent a lot of time in Vietnam. You know, this is something I'm asking back from the government after giving a couple of years of my life to you, and it didn't happen. That takes us to 3 weeks later. The crime begins in 1977. So Meissner had been eyeing this branch of the Equitable Savings and Loan there in Silver Spring, not too far from his parents' home. He had driven by there a number of times every day, and he'd kind of noticed that there was not a whole lot going on here. There was basically one teller that just kind of posted up and would provide some money, not a lot of security, a very kind of easy in and out. Again, this is 1977, security not too elevated at that point. So he decided to park across the street at a Safeway, disguised himself. He dyed his hair, put on a fake mustache, had some sunglasses on, and carried a .32 caliber pistol. He walked in. He demanded the money from the teller. She actually said, you don't have to do this. He said, I do. Asked for the money, got it. There's another man actually in the bank at the time. He walked over there, pointed the gun at him, demanded money from him, but that guy managed to stick his money under his deposit slips, and for Meissner, he didn't see it, so he walked away, ignored the man, and walked out. When he got out, he realized he had gotten about $2,600. So not a huge score at the time. That's about $10,000 of today's money. So a little bit more, but still not a big score, but still the money he needed to make it on tour. And the feeling that he had was pretty short-lived. He actually gave $800 to his ex-wife, Claire. He paid $1,000 to his friend for rent. Again, he was still behind in a lot of different areas, and he used the rest to just spend as he was getting around throughout the day. But it was money that only lasted him for just a few weeks. And at that point, he had to continue robbing banks to get by. But his lifestyle would continue to change as he would do this too. He's not a guy that would take the money and put it to use, right? As he kind of defended his actions and always said, hey, I'm here to help fund my time on tour, and I'm going to give this money back eventually when I get it. But instead, he would go out and buy new cars. He would spend the money on people. He actually, a story that he tells, and again, this was documented in the Esquire magazine article of 1980, and who knows if it's true, because it's hard to really take a whole lot of what he says on face value. He sees it exaggerate a lot. It's all about appearances for Meissner. But he said he was driving this new car when he came across this family that had a broken down vehicle on the side of the road. And he stopped to ask him what was happening, what was going on. And the family said, hey, we're on our way to Disney World with the family, and the car broke down. We don't know what we're going to do. And the story goes that Meissner actually drove him, bought them a car, and actually gave them extra money to spend at Disney because he wanted them to have a good time. Again, who knows how much of that story is true, but this is kind of the way Meissner went about the money. It was all about appearances, making people believe that he was successful when truly he was exactly the opposite. Over the next year, from 77 to 78, he robbed 18 more banks across Maryland, Virginia, and Florida. A lot of times he would net 20, 25,000. He would go in, same kind of whole approach. He would have a disguise. He would go in, rob these banks, these savings and loans, and exit with the money. He always had a little bit of anxiety doing this, as you would imagine, had some stomach issues this would cause beforehand. But he said it always changed his personality. He felt like a whole different person when he was in the middle of these acts. But he bought 2 Cadillacs during this time. He met a new woman that he found stranded on the side of the road. Again, another one of these stories where he helped her out. She came to meet him. They ended up getting married. He bought her a nice diamond ring, a nice watch, and they ended up getting married. She had no idea who he was, truly. He'd buy TVs for friends, gifts for families. Again, a lot of generosity, but did it with recklessness, right? And help people stuck in these dead-end lives. So there was a little bit of good, I guess, if you want to find a silver lining, but it didn't do a whole lot to help him with his career in golf. And as he actually began this string of bank robberies, his golf got worse, and he only made 3 cuts, never earned any prize money on the PGA Tour, and he actually described, the pressure for him playing, knowing he's going to have to maybe rob another bank if he didn't finish in the money, was pretty stressful for him. And a lot of this led to June of 1978, when I think, as he described, he kind of felt like he wanted to be caught at this point. He felt like his dream was winding down. I think he is getting kind of exhausted from this lifestyle, and ended up robbing a bank in a shopping center where his father worked. And things didn't go as smoothly in this final one. An alarm sounded immediately as he walked in. Someone shouted, "We got a robber in the building." And a nun actually saw him driving off, jotted down his license plate, and he panicked at this point. Threw the cash right out the window, although nobody ever recovered it, so they don't really truly know what happened to it. And the FBI was waiting for him, arrested him at his friend's house the next day. Things began to fall apart even more from there. He had to sell his beloved Eldorado. His wife, Sherry, ended up leaving with the car, motorcycle, furniture, and I think ran away with another man as well. And they never found the cash, as I mentioned, which, there was some rumors maybe he hid it, maybe Sherry got it, don't know. But he had to end up pleading guilty to multiple counts of armed bank robbery. He ended up serving about 4.5 years, became eligible for parole in 1983. That after spending his time at the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution, which was nicknamed, fittingly, a country club prison. The psychiatrists that really spent time with him during this, they really described him pretty well. They had some different explanations for why he behaved this way. Obviously, the trauma from Vietnam, the lack of parental affection that he felt growing up, the impulsivity, this need for approval, this inability to delay gratification. A lot of these things kind of led him down this path to try to chase these status symbols and this instant wealth when he actually wasn't good enough to accomplish it on his own. And when you look back at everything he actually stole, I think it amounted to somewhere today's dollars around $350,000 total that he stole along the way from all those banks. And he got out at 1983 and began his life post prison and also post PGA Tour. Now, you might think, okay, this is a story of a guy that didn't have the greatest upbringing maybe, or maybe just yearned to have a little bit more attention, and, a guy that really chased a career in the PGA and, just got led astray and just things kind of snowballed, right? Robbed a bank and then kind of kept chasing that a little bit until he eventually was caught. But I think over the course of his life, you truly get to see who Richard Meissner is. And I've kind of talked about that early on. But you fast forward years later, this is a huge story, right? And it would be a big story today with the bank robberies. But this is a guy also that in 1997, so 14 years after getting released, he robbed a Kansas City golf store, again, at gunpoint. According to court testimony, he was found guilty of this crime as well and sentenced to 50 years. Now, he obviously denied this, said he was in Florida at the time when this happened, but he was sentenced 50 years for stealing $100,000 in cash and golf clubs. Now, you would think another long sentence. Okay, his time is finally up, but not the case at all. Again, fast forward to 2011. February of 2011, he was arrested once again for felony theft, this time charged with stealing golf equipment from Woodforest Golf Club in Montgomery, Texas. Keep in mind, at this point, Meissner is 66 years old and still ripping off and trying to rob different outlets. Pretty incredible when you think about it, but it truly speaks to who he is. And I don't know where Meissner is exactly today in this moment, 14 years after those latest charges, puts him at 80 years old. You would think maybe he's too old to continue committing these crimes, but who knows? It's an incredible story either way. A guy with a lot of hope and promise on the PGA Tour, turned bank robber, 19 banks, would get out 14 years later, steal some other golf clubs and equipment, and then 14 more years after that, get arrested again for the same thing. That's Richard Meissner, and this is Distant Replay.